Testing, testing. Everything good? Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to have folks from far and wide. And so why don't we get started? It promises to be a really excellent hour. I'm just going to do a little bit of quick introductory material. First, I should introduce myself. My name is David Prescott. I'm the Director of Professional Development and Quality Improvement for the Beckett family of services. And I've been a big friend and fan of NERI Press for as long as it's been around. I think I first met its founder, Steve Benjis, in the early 1990s. And so Steve, unfortunately, was unable to join us today. He has been ill and wasn't able to use his voice properly. So he'll be back the next time around. I absolutely hate to miss Steve. Because these Consultinars are always incredibly fun with his input, and he always thinks of things that I never would have thought of myself. And so I also have this text from Joan Tabachnik, another dear friend and collaborator of many years, and I'm only going to read just a little bit of it because it's really more her words than mine. But what I want to say about NERI Press is NERI started as a publisher many years ago and very quickly realized that, that there's many ways to provide information in our field and to exchange resources and ideas and to offer helpful suggestions to professionals at the front lines. NERI, best known as a publisher of books, quickly realized that there's other ways of learning as well. And so here we are. A colleague of mine recently said that when they think about NERI Press, they think NERI does webinars as well as books. This is sort of part of NERI's identity, and I have to say that I agree. And as an author that's published with NERI, I've published a few books with NERI, the thing that I appreciate the most about NERI is that there's a lot of book publishers in the world. NERI Press is the only publisher I know where people at all levels of the company are actually working side by side in the field of preventing sexual abuse. And so when you read a NERI Press book, you know that not only has it been written by an expert, it's also been edited by experts and read by experts. And so just as they say the best restaurants are the ones where the truck drivers go to eat, so it is with NERI Press. If you want to know where the real professionals are, go to NERI Press. So with that, I'm also going to just add a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The first thing is I should mention that that I have dogs. I'm coming to you from my home in Falmouth, Maine, and so no webinar ever goes without some sort of a technical flaw somewhere along the lines. And so if you hear my dogs barking or the sound of a little bit of noise in the background, I apologize in advance. I'm also going to say that one of my primary motivations in doing this is research done by a fellow named K. Anders Ericsson, who discovered after researching experts and expertise that very often the people who are the absolute best in any field of human endeavor get to be that way not only by practicing their craft, but also by the work that they do in between sessions, in between exercises, and so on. The best chess players in the world, for example, don't get to be the best simply by doing chess. They also get to be the best by studying other people's games. And so if you want to be an expert chess player, an expert musician, you have to study your instrument, study your craft, and you have to watch how other people do it. And so this was one of the primary motivations for putting together the Consultinar from the start. It also came out of some discussions that Steve Benjis and I had where we often get concerned that as a field we don't reflect on our work enough. We don't think about the kinds of things that we do, and that we don't have enough opportunity to really go back to the basics of things like case formulation, case conceptualization, and of course that all-time best question, that I ever hear therapists ask, which is, what the heck am I going to do with this case? Does it get any more complicated than this? So I just wanted to put that out there. And on this note, before I introduce Jennifer, just want to say that from this moment forward and for the rest of the hour, let's all swear a firm oath of ignorance that not everybody has all the answers at all the time, at every time. Some of us sure have tried, and many of us wish that we did, but I won't be entirely satisfied unless both Jennifer and I have made a mistake by the end of the hour or not thought of something obvious, and I hope it's the same with you, but I do hope that you'll ask lots of questions, and let's move forward. So let's see, let me just introduce, here she is, Jennifer Hixson. Jennifer, why don't you join us? Jennifer is, let me go forward just a bit here. Jennifer is a PsyD. Yes, thank you. Jennifer is a PsyD and also a board-certified behavior analyst, something that I've always found very, very interesting, since all of my experience with applied behavioral analysis has taught me that very often BCBAs can think quite differently than other clinicians. And so, Jennifer, I won't be able to see your camera, but I trust that you're on. Would you like to get us started?
Yes, thank you, David. Today I am presenting on a 14-year-old Caucasian girl. I do a lot of treatment in several different states and residential treatment facilities. And this is one of the girls that I'm consulting on right now. It's a 14-year-old Caucasian girl. She lives with her paternal aunt and her husband, and she's been with them since about age 6. In the home is a biological sister who is 7 years old. There is a male cousin who, they all just say that these are siblings. Like, so she'll say my brother, even though this is a cousin, and she's not been adopted into this situation. This is still a relative placement where ultimately DCS has just completely pulled out, and just guardianship is sitting with this relative placement, but no adoption. And then there's a female cousin, 15 years old. The two cousins are biological to the paternal aunt and husband, and then there's one biological sister. She has a history of sexual abuse by a biological brother, and also neglect when living with the biological family, which is what prompted her to go into DCS care and then subsequently be placed with the relatives. Currently, she's receiving treatment in a residential treatment facility in Missouri, and the referral was initially made for mental health challenges, not sexual harm. So if you want to go to the next slide.
I will, Jennifer. Let me just ask, though, a quick clarifying question, which is, at what age did this sexual abuse and neglect happen?
Between the ages of 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the neglect has been pretty much since birth.
Okay. Oh, so a lot of, it's safe to say we're looking at a complex trauma case.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Okay. So her sexual harm history is that there were 2 separate incidents. When she came into treatment, the family was aware of some more sexually reactive behavior she had done around the age of 9. So she was 9 and the cousin was around 5. More sexual exploratory behavior between the 2 of them. They both got some treatment around it, good touch, bad touch, things like that. So there was some treatment done with the initial sexual behavior. And then while in treatment, it was found that around the age of 12, she began being sexual with the same cousin sibling in the home again, and this came out because of some stuff that had happened with the cousin, and during an interview that was happening with him, he disclosed all of this additional information, which is how it wound up coming to us. And so It's not really being followed by the legal system. The cousin has some intellectual disabilities that they were kind of worried about him being a witness, so they just thought, and she was already in treatment with us, so they just thought she can do some treatment with us, and that he was in treatment, she was in treatment, and they just figured that they could move forward, and that's not really uncommon for that to happen. So that's kind of her, and as of right now, we don't really know the specific details. That's what we're trying to, the CAC won't release, there's a CAC, of course, you guys know those are across the United States.
Can you just tell us what a CAC is, though?
Child Advocacy Center.
A Child Advocacy Center. So this is where, I'll tell you the reason I ask. With people from Canada, and I see a hi from Australia, so allow me to say good day. I'll be there in November. I can't wait. Perhaps you could explain a little bit of how it is we get to a place where different agencies are assessing sexual abuse and not talking to each other.
The Child Advocacy Centers are set up across the United States to ultimately do one-stop shop around forensic interviews for children who have been sexually abused, and so they're not having to go through several different interviews. So the police are present, the counselors are present, DCS is present, so pretty much anybody who might touch these children is present at the time of the interview. The interview is typically recorded, and there is a transcript made of it. That way kids do not have to be interviewed over and over again by different professionals. Okay. So that's the actual the purpose of a CAC, and then we contacted the investigator to the CAC and had a conversation with them, which is how we came to know some of this information, but the CAC won't disclose detailed information to us.
And I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but do you have any insights as to why they're unwilling to share this information?
I think it's a protocol. I think that if we wanted to get the information, we could go back all the way to the DCS office and try to get more information from them. So it's a protocol system. It's not necessarily that they won't. It's more of a protocol that they're not the ones that disclose it, because really they're doing the assessment for the Department of Children's Services. Okay,
understood. So it's not as though people are being tight-fisted. It's please go to the right person to get the right answer. Thank you. That's very helpful. What else would you like to say before I move on to the next slide?
Nothing.
Okay, so up to this point, engaged in sexually reactive behavior under the age of 12 with her paternal cousin, who was 9 years of age at the time, and there was...
He was 5, she was 9.
I beg your pardon, thank you. So she was 9, he was 5, and this led to some sort of preliminary kinds of treatment, as you said, sort of good touch, bad touch, education, sorts of things. And when it turned out that both kids were in one form of treatment or another, and that there was more information, it sounds like the adults involved basically said, these kids are in treatment, let's not do anything further with this at this time. So sounds good. Thanks, Jennifer. And let's move on. And I'll get my slide to work, I hope. Isn't this interesting? Now it's my computer that's freezing. So hold on. And there we go. All right.
So some of the barriers to treatment in this case that we've run up against is there's some medical illnesses in the family. So it makes it difficult for the guardians to fully participate. There's poverty in the family, which makes it difficult for them to travel to where we are. The poor family therapy progress is the family tends to engage in therapy based on a crisis, not necessarily based on long-term treatment planning. So the other victim in this case, or the other child that the sexual behavior occurred with, isn't really in any sort of consistent treatment right now, which is, and reunification is something that we were looking for, which is part of my consult question. And then there's poor family therapy progress in terms of the family staying in such a crisis that we're focused more on how do we get them engaged just to even show up to treatment, that we can't actually do the family therapy goals and objectives that we actually have set, that the family has actually agreed to earlier. They just kind of have seemed to fallen off. And then the relative placement caregivers have trauma histories of their own, and that may be one of the barriers that's coming up, is as we've come into the sexual harm and wanting to go deeper into that, then I think it's bringing up some other things for family members that's making it somewhat difficult for them to stay engaged. So there's a lot of barriers to this that don't really have any sort of blaming to them. They're just barriers that are in place that we're trying to navigate, that's just making it very difficult to treat the client.
Wow. And so did I hear you correctly that you've got this family that has signed a treatment plan, said that they're willing to participate in treatment, and yet it seems as though there's always something else going on that prevents them from participating to the best of their abilities? Is that about right?
Mm-hmm.
So a real challenge, and one that I imagine is going to be familiar to many people. I see one quick question, which is, where is the biological brother at this point?
In prison.
In prison. Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. A good answer to a good question. So very good. And just a quick observation before I switch to the next slide, which is, I see the word poor appears twice in this slide, as well as the word poverty. And that's not even taking into account the word trauma and the two words medical illnesses. This is a family with a lot of challenges. And in terms of barriers, about the best thing that you can say is that the family lives about an hour from the facility. And it could always be worse. It could be 2 hours, I suppose. But I'm taking a wild guess that this family might have a difficult time driving an entire hour if they have the car to do it. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. And here's your next slide.
Okay. So this is kind of my consultation question. She's not really facing any legal ramifications. So ultimately, should she engage in sexual harm treatment? The case is kind of expanded a little bit. We have DCS involved because of some of the poor. Because of some of our concerns about reunification, we have asked DCS to step in and help. And so some of the questions on the table is, should she even be engaging in the sexual harm treatment if she's not been adjudicated? Should the process of reconciliation, reconnection, and reunification, take place in the fashion that literature is supporting right now? Of course, looking at those barriers and finding a way to engage them and get them invested in enhancing safety for everybody. And then, should there be ramifications if these tasks don't happen due to
Sure.
What should we be doing to really help her not re-engage in these behaviors, and at what cost do we go to the length of ensuring that safety, or at least trying to set that safety up for her and for future people that she could be sexually harmful with?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And actually, if I can ask another question on behalf of, I believe it's Ken, what type of medical illnesses have you been encountering with the family?
It's interesting that they won't tell us.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I really hate to say it. I'm making a guess that there's possibly something that has to be treated 3 times a week, something that requires a home health care nurse to come in. So those kinds of illnesses. There's also been some past accidents that have injured backs and bones and things like that, making driving sometimes difficult and things like that. So those.
Go ahead.
So those are the primary ones that come up most. Yeah. And we've been very sensitive, like the caregiver who has the home health nurse. We don't, of course, require that person to come in. We would like the other caregiver to come in so that caregiver can do some bonding with the client. So we've tried to be as sensitive and work around these medical illnesses to the best of our ability.
Sure. Wow. And so, boy, you're in a tricky position. I see one person commented it could be dialysis. It could be a lot of different things. And we have an excellent question also from Ellen, which we're gonna table for now, but come back to, which is the $64,000 question. Does the family want to engage in the work needed to take her back? Which I think is, I think that's the one that's at the back of everyone's mind. Returning to Ken's question, it seems to me that there's nothing like asking the right question at the right time. That asking about the medical complaints leads to a very, very interesting answer, which is we don't know. And that when we don't know, it's tempting to wonder. What are the reasons? How is it that we don't know? And obviously, this is a family that's really private about their medical business. They certainly have every right to be. And on the other hand, when I'm doing this kind of work, and I don't know those kinds of things, or I have somebody that's unwilling to tell me, I start to think about what's the nature of my therapeutic alliance with these folks. And so we can come back to these. Any thoughts before we move on, or
From the audience or from me?
or from you, Jennifer? I'm sorry.
It's hard to say. The family has never shared why they're not comfortable sharing. I think part of it is because they are confused as to why it's an issue. Like, why is talking about what's going on with me important when it's, the client that you're supposed to be focused on?
Right.
So they have never given us a reason as to why they're not willing to go more in depth into what the significance or what the specific medical illnesses are that they're dealing with.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful. Another clarifying question from I can't quite read the name from here. Interested to know what kinds of assessments have you used with this client and possibly with the family?
Most of our assessments are more on the trauma-focused CBT side because that's where we started with her with the trauma-focused CBT. In the state of Tennessee, doing a psychosexual is a legal document, so we don't do psychosexuals on kids that have not been adjudicated. And we put together a sexual harm treatment plan based more on her competencies around affect regulation, her interpersonal relationships, and things like that. So we really haven't used any assessments, and we haven't done risk assessments or psychosexual with her because the state of Tennessee is very tricky about what we do and when we do those things. So my assessments have been more of your informal checklists around competencies, interpersonal interactions, family dynamics, and things like that.
So you're really going for the affect regulation, the self-regulation, self-management kinds of things. Maybe just a technical question from me that might be of interest to others, which is, so you're not allowed to call it a psychosexual assessment, and on the other hand, sooner or later, if you work with kids, you're going to have to do something to assess their overall development, their overall psychology, and their overall sexual development. What do you call it, and would it be against Tennessee regulations if you used a risk assessment instrument, even though you didn't actually use the term psychosexual?
No, absolutely. I think that that's something that I could definitely look into.
Yeah. Now, I just ask because part of me says if we're mental health providers and we have licenses, I keep wondering, so I'm a little bit at a loss to understand how the state can come in and say that we can or can't characterize our work as this or that. And there's been many recent legal cases involving what kinds of treatment people can and can't provide. I can understand it when it's assessment testing, as with a background in social work, administering a Rorschach is a little bit outside my usual skill set and educational background, even though sorry.
I think part of the difficulty, though, that I need to clarify in this is a Tennessee kid being served in Missouri. So I think that's where this starts to get a little bit tricky, too, is that we've got you know, her coming from Tennessee into Missouri, and that's where some of the stuff, and they're not wanting to charge her with anything. So that's really where the stickler comes in, and then, you know, trying to look at the different rules in different states. So I think a lot of it up until now had more to do with, did we need to do all of that given some of the other informal stuff we were doing, and was that really necessary for us to move forward with all of that, you know, with all of that testing. So I think that's the reason we didn't get into that political battle around some of that stuff, because we had a treatment plan that was working, we had 2 different states we were dealing with, so we just kind of felt like, let's go forward, and then all of a sudden the parents decide, or not sure exactly if they're deciding or not, but they're not able or willing to engage in treatment right now. And then, so this question around assessment has actually come up for me more recently around risk assessment, because if they're not going to engage, then I'm worried about all of the things that do go into a risk assessment, and those things are not happening right now. Mm-hmm. So it may have to be a question put back on the table that we are going to have to look at and readdress.
Yeah, sounds good. And of course, I sort of interrupt the flow to ask these questions from the audience because they're excellent questions. Mm-hmm. And things like assessment methodology, this is the sort of bread and butter issues of so many professionals in our field. I saw that Ida asked a question, doesn't DCS share this information for treatment? And I believe that Dr. Hixson, Jennifer, did indeed mention that this would be the place to go. So I was just puzzled that an agency that purports to do one-stop shopping wouldn't share information, but it makes perfect sense to please go back to the source. There was a question around what were her sexually reactive behaviors, and I'm trying to remember if you spoke to that or if you actually know all that much.
You know, again, that's the really private part of this family, is we don't, and they're not willing to share that information. Again, I think in the beginning, the first time the sexually reactive behaviors occurred, it was, they were able to share it was from their perspective. Again, I don't know how much minimizing might be happening with the family, but kind of the whole, you show me yours, I'll show you mine, no penetration, nothing like that, and they caught it very quickly and were able to address it. The second situation that came up, I don't even know if the parents know the specifics of that. I don't know if the parents asked to know the specifics of that coming out of the CAC evaluation. So that's where we were getting stuck, because the sexually reactive behaviors that she had done when she was younger had already been dealt with. She'd already had counseling around all of those things. And so having her kind of go back into that isn't as important to me as getting her to take responsibility and accountability for what happened between the counseling and now, for this to have re-engaged a couple of years later. And that's the information that we don't have. I have met with the client myself, because I'm the consultant on the case, and tried to get information from her, and it was kind of like, well, you know, we had our clothes off and then we got caught. Okay, well, what might have happened had you not been caught? I don't know. You have no idea. You had your clothes off with your 9-year-old cousin, but you're not sure what would have happened. No. And when I said to her, I think you do know, and I was trying to be very, you know, just connecting and trying to stay present. She was very oppositional and had a few expletives for me about how would I know what was going on in her head.
Wow. Okay, so you've got a family that's really private and only minimally engaged, and you've also got that endless dilemma of your signatures are on the consent form to assessment and treatment, and yet your actions to some degree are saying no, no, no. The consent form says yes, and your actions are telling us no. And yeah, I've seen a number of comments. I'm going to try to limit these for right now and just say, you know, the audience is asking, I think, some reasonable questions of how do you keep this kid safe? How do you, if I'm reading these correctly, how do you balance the need for this kid to have a family when the family isn't meaningfully invested in this level of change. I mean, it sort of breaks my heart to even say this. I have done some assessments. I should mention that here in the state of Maine, the emphasis is always on family reunification to whatever extent is possible. And so there's this sort of overall ethos, if you will, a real culture of we're the state of Maine. We reunify families wherever we possibly can. And at the same time, within this sort of cultural context, I've wound up having to do some assessments, including on young women, where I've had to say there is no way that this family can reunite under these circumstances. It pains me to say this, but in many cases, it's been the right call to make. And in the two cases that I'm thinking of most recently, history has borne it out that I was correct. These are incredibly complicated decisions. So I tell you what, if we could, I make it. We're about halfway through all of this. I thought I'd share some ideas on your referral question, on your consult questions, and then we can open it up for further discussion. I also have a ton of questions for you, but here's what I've got to say at this point. Should the child be engaging in sexual harm treatment? I think is another one of the $64,000 questions. It seems to me as though we professionals have very often said, this is treatment for sexual harm, and this over here is everything else. And what you have is, you know, a girl that's engaged in some problem sexual behavior from a very young age, when it is entirely possible, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, it's entirely possible that she did not realize fully that what she was doing was even against the rules of her house. Much less knew, you know, or had any appreciation for the nature of harm. As one participant rightly noted, we also have no shortage of trauma across this family system. And so there's when you talk about things like affect regulation, there's a question in my mind of who in this family can manage their affect in a reasonable sort of way. And I just want to make sure. I'm hearing some background noise. I don't think it's on my end.
It's not on my end.
Okay, well, we'll keep going because that's what we do. And sometimes the best therapy we do is with bazillions of distractions in the background. So, so very good. I'm going to suggest that we do not know whether or not this young woman needs to engage in specific sexual harm treatment. It does seem to me, and others may disagree, up to this point, that she's had a developmental history that has completely interfered with her knowledge around sexual matters and has completely interfered with, or at least given her great cause to be confused about where does safety lie in her life. What does healthy sexuality actually mean for her, for her family, for the you know, for the society around her? When I think about how difficult it is to be a young woman of 14 years old and all of the messages that young girls get from society, I mean, you can see I'm a guy, I'm a man in my mid-50s. You know, this sexual matters are difficult enough for all human beings to figure out. It's difficult for me with 31 years of experience in the field to even imagine what it must be like for her trying to negotiate normal human development when so much of her own development has been taken away from her. And so does she need to be in sexual harm treatment? It seems to me, and others can disagree, that that she very definitely needs treatment that's going to focus on her capacities at establishing healthy relationships, at eventually becoming having a healthy sexuality. As I'm listening to you talking, I'm thinking to myself, above all, above everything else, here is a young woman that needs to move on with her life in the way and in the time that makes sense to her, and that no treatment that is imposed upon her from outside can possibly foster her long-term healthy development and well-being. So that there's a real question for me of what's meaningful to her. And I'm going to come back to that point, but the questions I keep thinking are, where does safety lie for this girl and her family, and what does she do, and what does her family do with pain? I'm very interested in these kinds of things. I realize I'm covering a lot of ground in a short period of time. And so when I think about this, I think about it may be that by giving her a little bit of education in sexual matters and by engaging her in some really sophisticated trauma treatment, that you may actually reduce her risk independent of other factors. So when you ask, does she need to be in sexual harm treatment? I don't know, is my best answer. Does she need to do step A? In step A, you're going to completely disclose all of the bad sexual behavior you've engaged in. I'd be really cautious about doing that. This is a girl who knows very little about sexual boundaries at this point. I think we need to be able to respect whatever sexual boundaries are there to begin with. So that's what I've got up to this point. We can come back to this. Your second question is, should the process of reconciliation, reconnection, and reunification still take place in a way that's supported by the current sexual harm literature? Well, I'm going to say something very provocative here and say I'm not sure that there's anything that's actually supported by research in our field at this point. I'm not aware of any research off the top of my head. Others may have something, but I've gone looking for it and I haven't been able to find it. I'm not aware of any research that's examined reconciliation processes in cases of sexual harm. I've heard about some really bad ideas that have been described in the past. If I were to highlight the work of two professionals in our field who seem to have done a great deal of not only of thinking about it but also writing about it, I would go first to my very close friend and colleague, Joanne Schladel, who I know that you've worked with some as well, Jennifer. And I would also go to my my good friend and colleague, Phil Rich, who's written one of the best books on that's sort of a 101 level of working with these clients. My number one concern would be, under what conditions will this girl be safe, and will others be safe around her? Which leads to the question, how can you work with her while she's in placement? How can you work with her in a way that she can develop a future and a lifestyle where sexual abuse is really undesirable as well as unnecessary? So I don't know. It's a big, broad topic. Again, in the interest of time, what are some ways to engage the family given the barriers? Now you're talking my language, and I would be thinking to myself, the first place I'm going with this family is, how do you get involved with the family in the way that they know you are a safe person and in their corner? Now, having said that, can we just be honest for a minute that you might not be a safe person to them? After all, her placement and her return to their family in many ways is in your hands, and that they are probably far more sensitive to the power that you hold over them than most professionals are in our field. I'm really sorry. I hope I don't sound rude to the professionals in our field, but I will say that a side effect of working in this field is that we oftentimes forget how much power we hold over the families and the clients in our care. And our clients and our families know it. We're the ones that sometimes lose sight of it. So all of that aside, I'd be looking for, what are all the ways that this family feels two ways about anything? Number one, they know you're a psychologist, and a good one. And so they're going to be wondering to what extent you're making judgments about them, how much you're going to be bringing your own values in. Can you understand a family that's got medical illnesses, doesn't necessarily have a car that's going to make the 1-hour drive to the facility, et cetera, et cetera. Can you really walk a mile in their shoes, as the saying goes, and so on? And again, I'll pick that theme up in 1 second. And then, what are the ramifications if these tasks do not happen due to a lack of family support? You know, that's it's difficult to underestimate all the possible ramifications. Whatever you might have to say, one of the ways that I always approach this is to start my sentences with other people. Other people's sentences I find can really help. You know, the CAC, there's other people that are really worried about your daughter's capacity for progress or ability to progress in treatment at this time. Other people are really concerned that that she might wind up in trouble again without the right kind of supervision and structure. Other people this, other people that. Am I making sense quickly, Jennifer? I'll just check in. Okay.
Yes.
So here's where I'm going with this. After all is said and done, my question and my thinking as a therapist is, number one, what are your goals? You don't have to answer right now. What are your goals, Dr. Hixson? What are your treatment plan goals? What are your goals that you believe are empirically supported goals for this young woman? And then I want to know, what are the family's goals? What are the family's goals really? What do they really want? What's missing from their future with their daughter that they want to be there? What are they longing for? These kinds of things. And then I'm really interested, what are her goals? Not the ego-building defensive nonsense goals that she might be willing to tell you when she's highly guarded and defensive, but what are her goals? What's missing from her life that she wants to be there? Who does she want to be when she grows up? So your goals, her goals, and her family goals could be all very, very different. The one thing I do know is if you guys aren't having a very serious discussion about what are all of your goals, given the limitations, given the medical complications, given everything else, if you don't have agreement on goals, you don't have treatment. You have a bunch of people that are going to try to look as good as they can in your treatment program, but you don't have treatment until you've got complete join-up. Okay, sorry, that's my little soapbox rant. Then, what does this girl see as the best way forward? What are the tasks of treatment that she will hold near and dear? What's meaningful to her? What about your approach is going to make the biggest difference to her? As a quick example of what I'm talking about, I've been doing work with a 17-year-old young man. In our first session, he basically said, you're going to have to hold my feet to the fire. Don't you try that motivational interviewing stuff with me. It won't work. You need to really give me such a spanking if you think I'm not carrying my weight. Now, these are my words, my images, not his. But he basically said, the way you're used to working with other teenagers might not work with me. You're going to have to be hard on me. So I don't know what it is for this girl. She might say, I really, really need you to understand me at a very deep level. Might even be, I need you to be able to sit with me and not say a word. I don't know. Then what I'm interested in, for total clarification across everybody involved in this case, is what is your role, Dr. Hixson? What does this girl see as being your role within all of this? Right now, I'm getting the sense, and I could be wrong, that everybody, that her vision of your role and the family's vision of your role is you're the person who's going to give them the note. You're the one that's going to sign off, done with treatment, with steps A through Z, and all of this kind of thing, when in fact, your job is to get in there and pursue meaningful, really meaningful change. And then, so what is the role from your perspective, her perspective, and the family's perspective? And then the big one for me: how does this girl want the world to view her? How does she want the world to view her? So, for example, myself, if you were to ask me the same question, I would want the world to view me as competent, warm, approachable, and professional. What's the difference between how the world actually does view me and my ideal version? of myself is a different topic for another day when I'm in therapy. But what's the difference between how she wants the world to view her and how they actually do? And I suspect if you ask the same question of the family, how do they want the world to view them? And what's the difference between where they are and where they want to be? That kind of thing would be really important to explore. In other words, you need a real therapeutic alliance, agreement on the nature of your relationship, agreement on the tasks of treatment, agreement on the goals of treatment, and all of this done in a way that meets the values and preferences of the of your clients, which are going to be wildly different. So, yeah. So, family and ambivalence, for me, a lot of it boils down to that. And with that, I'm going to shut up and see if what I just said made sense to you, Jennifer. And then, as you answer, I'm going to scroll through some of the questions.
Absolutely. I definitely think that we initially had agreement on the goals and the direction and what people wanted, and somehow that changed. And it changed for everybody. It changed for the client, it changed for the family, and it changed, of course, for us, because our goals of moving forward towards healing of trauma and sexual health and healthy sexual boundaries, which was our initial goal, has now turned to safety, re-engagement, realignment. And so, I mean, for us, even our goals have changed at this point. So that would indicate that there's got to have been a shift in the other goals, and which one prompted which, I'm not sure I'm overly worried about. I'm overly worried about getting them all realigned again is ultimately the goal that we need to be looking at.
Well, when you say realigned, meaning everybody's really, truly on the same page.
Right. Because it does make me wonder, were they really even on the same page to begin with? You know, or did they just feel like, oh, well, this is something she has to do, let's sign off on it, not realizing the full system engagement that we were looking for. And then maybe when they realized it, maybe they didn't fully understand the revamping of the treatment plan that we had done.
They kind of took a step back and said, hold on a second. This is sort of classic motivational interviewing strategy, that you get a client engaged and then you try to focus on what it is that they want to change in their lives. And then as they really start to focus on that and start to make a plan, they might say, now that I'm making the plan, I'm not sure I wanted to do this to begin with, and it's time to go back and re-engage. I'm seeing one comment here that I think will not come as a surprise, urging a focus on stress management, coping, and communication amongst the various members of the family. I say amen to that. Somebody else saying aloha from Hawaii, David. I love it. Are there any validated assessments for girls with sexually abusive behavior? And the bottom line is absolutely not. Boy, do I wish that there was. If it's okay to toot my own horn for just a moment, I think for me the closest thing I've seen to a good risk assessment scale with adolescent females is the work of Sue Robinson. Sue spells her name, well, it's short for Susan, obviously, spells it S-U. She actually published a risk assessment. It's sort of based along the lines of the eraser. It's based entirely on clinical experience, but it's sort of 20, 25 items with which you score a 0, 1, or a 2. And it actually appeared in my first book, which is called Current Perspectives. So you have to buy the book. That's the bad news. The good news is it's the only thing that we've got. I'll quickly say the reoffense rates, the known reoffense rates of adult women hover around the percentage of 1 to 5%. Most women, the vast majority of women, are not known to reoffend sexually. This is a really interesting phenomenon. Obviously, not all sexual abuse gets reported. Not everybody gets convicted. Perhaps there's something about that with the fact that people are unwilling to report women. I don't know. There could be any number of reasons for this. All we know is that it's low. Another question comes in saying, how does adjudication, non-adjudication influence your decision as to whether or not to provide sexual harm treatment? Now that is an excellent question, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, Jennifer. My thinking is, you know, after a certain point, I don't care whether they've been adjudicated or not. I only care about building a better life for them, stopping the behavior, and preventing them from doing it again, assuming that they did do it. What I'm not interested in is people coming into treatment who genuinely believe that they didn't do it and might not have done it, and my saying, but you have to go through, treatment steps A through Z. I'm very, adjudicated, non-adjudicated may influence the treatment setting. It may influence a lot of other kinds of things. But what I'm really interested in is how do we build a better life for the kids that we work with. Do you disagree, Jennifer?
No, no, not at all. I think for me, the difference that I've come across so far in the different states that I work in is adjudicated youth are usually forced to go to treatment, and some non-adjudicated youth are on deferment from adjudication.
Yeah.
And then you have the group like I have, which is, they're not going to do anything with her, but and whether she does or doesn't get treatment, I'm not sure anybody's paying attention to in this case. So I think that for me, what I've come across is adjudication pretty much dictates you're going to get it, whether you want it or not. So that's kind of where I live in the different states I consult in. That's kind of how it is.
Yeah, and that's you're almost sort of switching one set of problems for another. Very often, I didn't do it, I didn't get caught, now go away, as opposed to this is nonsense. I shouldn't be here. I didn't do it, or what have you. It can be a lot of different, just different challenges for clinicians. Another excellent question of what kinds of recent behaviors has she recently exhibited? Now, I think this is a really, really important question because, as we all know, kids, especially teenagers, especially at the age of 14, change, and they change dramatically. Jennifer, I'd be interested to know, has she exhibited any kinds of inappropriate sexual behaviors that seemed planned and purposeful since she's been in placement?
No, I think she's had one situation where she's, gotten into a relationship with another girl, and for us, same age, no coercion, that's kind of more institutionalized behavior in my thinking.
Sure.
So no, there hasn't been anything from a sexually inappropriate harm, grooming, none of that kind of stuff since she's been with us in treatment.
Okay, and it's a good question. I also got another comment from Missouri, a little bit unclear about using measures with non-adjudicated kids. I think it really gets back to the term psychosexual evaluation seems to have particular legal standing in various states. I know that in various places you have to be very cautious how you use the word psychosexual because it's sometimes carved into statute as a specific type of assessment. So to the person in Missouri, I actually wouldn't worry about using the measures too much. We just need to have some knowledge of our local jurisdiction and any kind of sensitivity towards language. I know that in the state of Maine there can be some funkiness around that, the use of that term as well. Funkiness, by the way, is a good clinical term. So I'm looking at the time and realizing that we're going to have to start to wind down in just a couple of minutes. I do see one, I think it's from Marilyn, who says, just a comment in terms of her risk for sexually reoffending. I believe females have one of the lowest recidivism rates for sexual reoffending. Thank you, Marilyn. I'm glad you said that before. I had the chance to earlier. What do you think the child she abused may need to heal? And perhaps treatment should be focused on that if there are no current patterns of sexual misconduct. Now, this is another interesting point. I'm always reminded of my dear friend Jan Hindman, who passed away 8 years ago now. It doesn't seem like that long. Who always reminded us that treatment strategies can also be of assistance to the people who have been harmed. This is a point made by Alan Jenkins in his excellent book, Invitations to Responsibility as well, that sometimes there is a place in treatment for a person to say, and this is goes to the reconciliation part, what I did was my fault and my responsibility. You didn't ask for it. This was something entirely, that I did, and I, want to be of any, kind of assistance to you that I can be going forward. It's maybe a little bit clinically parsed and phrased, but I think that you get the idea. And then how are the treatment plans and objectives designed to provide the experiences the client needs to stable high-risk areas? Also, have you considered, oh, here's an excellent, I think this is the question around treatment planning is one for Dr. Hixson to consider around what are the high-risk factors that you might need to look at. For my money, Jennifer, you can disagree. Number one, treat the trauma. Treat the complex trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Treat the affect regulation, and it may very well be that this is a young woman who finds her own way in the world. Now, I'll be interested, Jennifer, in your thoughts on this. The question is, have you considered EMDR? Thoughts on that?
No, we don't have anybody EMDR trained in this particular facility, and we do look at different EMDR possibilities and consulting with outside people in situations where we might want to do that. But we haven't. I think I do like EMDR, and I think if we had somebody in-house that could do it, I think that every kid
something
that's
to consider.
Residential treatment could benefit from EMDR.
Speaking purely anecdotally, and then I am going to have to move on. I'm sorry for all of the questions that we haven't been able to answer, but and these questions are excellent, by the way. Anecdotally, what I've heard about EMDR is people finding that it seems to do better when there's a clear sort of abusive event that somebody is trying to resolve, integrate back into their lives, and move on from, etc. Whereas for people with complex trauma, I've heard of EMDR being a little bit less successful. I think this is one of those things where we need to make these decisions on a case-by-case basis. I oversee the treatment of a program for young women in Maine and in New Hampshire, and we found that we use EMDR in cases of complex trauma with varying degrees of success. And that sometimes there's a time and a place to say let's give this a try. Our approach tends to be a little bit more sort of holistic, using things like the ARC model and what have you. So with this, I am going to say, if you're not aware, and perhaps Greg can jump in as well, that the PowerPoints for this webinar will be posted, and you'll be able to see those. Hold on one second. Here we go. So if you haven't already seen Dr. Hixson, here's a picture of her now. And that when the workshop is over, please be sure to close out your account, and that you'll be receiving an evaluation, and that we would really, really like your feedback. We're going to also mention that the next webinar is actually going to be on building motivation for change. That's presented here by yours truly, and I certainly would love to have you be aware of that. And also want to mention, I mentioned Phil Rich earlier, and would just like to say that he is going to be conducting a 3-day certification training in risk assessment in Massachusetts, and that you can find out more about that from the NERI website. So you can go to neripress.org. You can Google search, here's the address right now, neripress.org. And if you'd like to contact me, if you had a burning question, comment, question, petty annoyance, or anything else that you would like to share, please feel free. If you don't have my email address, it's vtprescott@earthlink.net, or you can simply Google search me, David Prescott. I'm not the trombone player from Southern California, but pretty much every other David Prescott Google search will get you to me. Dr. Jennifer Hixson, I really want to say thank you so much. Coming on to one of these consultinars can be a real nail-biting experience,
Yes.
and I really appreciate you coming on board. I hope that you felt safe and as safe and secure as I know you try to make your clients. Any last comments or thoughts as before we wind down?
No, just thank you. I appreciate the time and giving me some good guidance to try and get this case moving in a different direction.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for participating. Sorry we couldn't get to every question. And thank you, Steve and Joan from NERI for making these consultinars possible. And with that, I'm signing off. Have a good one, folks. Bye-bye.